Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the Kane Audio VLOG. It's Friday, so it's time for another Ask Me Anything. Before I get started with the questions, usual rules apply. Ask me anything in the comments below this video and I'll get to you next week. Before I move on to last week's questions, house admin wise, so this is going to be a bit crap, but because it's an announcement about an announcement, but I think I've kind of touched on it a couple of times in some of these videos before. I have been working on a project with a few mates of mine who are more on the dev side of things, and we are developing a website that does some audio processing, and I can't go into too much detail about that just yet, but hopefully we've started making some real good progress with it now, and hopefully, I mean, this has been going on for years on the development side, so hopefully in the next few weeks we're gonna have something that we can kind of open up to the public for alpha testing, I suppose. So it's pre-beta testing, but I will be, if everything goes to plan, I'll be announcing it on this channel. I'll probably do YouTube and Facebook, do like a premiere video, whatever it is, so you guys get notified that it's going to happen on this date, and that will be the announcement, hopefully, for alpha testers to sign up. I think we're probably going to limit the amount of alpha testers to begin with, but yeah, so I'm being really vague and I apologise, because I hate it when people do announcements about announcements, but I'm excited about it. It's something that's really started ramping up in development over the last couple of weeks, and I can't keep my gob shut, so that's all I'm going to say. As for anything else, I don't think there's anything else. There's a bunch of Mau5trap things going on, but again, I've got to keep my lips sealed on that. I think that's it. So yeah, let's get on with last week's questions. Starting at the top, St. Nicholas, 808 subs at the time of writing this. Awesome, I didn't even notice that. Deadly Custard, what about if you provided us with something really limited, like 2 sounds? Oh, so this is talking about me potentially doing a competition or something on this channel. Limited like 2 sounds, and then we try and make a track which has to include those 2 sounds as a feature. I personally wouldn't expect anything out of it other than a bit of fun and hearing what people come up with. Community challenge, just for fun kind of thing, dunno. Love the idea of something interactive, would help to create some chatter in the FB group too. Yeah, I am liking this idea. I'm liking the idea of doing a competition. I like the idea of it kind of being just for fun. So what I might do is do my bit just for fun and maybe put together either a chord phrase or a melody or a couple of little stems or something. So I have been thinking about this, and I feel like you guys need to get something from it as well as me, or probably more than me, because what do I need from it? But I like the idea of maybe putting together a competition. I'll maybe do some stems, not remix stems, but some loops or something, which will be not from a loops pack that's for sale or anything, but I'll probably just maybe give them away on this channel, and you guys can do whatever you want with it. And because I will have done them outside of any loops pack or whatever, there'll be no question of copyright, so if you guys want to release your versions, you can just crack on and do it. I would say something like that might be better, and maybe if I release the winner, who knows? But I think that's a good idea. I think there's something in that, so yeah, let's definitely do something along those lines. Edit sub37 on high 5. Nathan Zaskarinskis, sub37 Dom, high 5. I need a bit of advice from you if you don't mind. I've started to integrate my Euro rack more, rather than just making blips, bloops and random noises. which, let's face it, is what 99% of Eurorack users do. And I've started to make some really nice bass lead sounds. The downside is once I unpatch it, I lose the sound. I've contemplated keeping a patch book, but in all honesty that is too difficult considering the patching and various settings on the modules. So how would you go about keeping the sound? Would you record various patterns and modulations using the patch, or build a library of various one-shots to import into Sampler? Good question. So you've already mentioned the patch book, so for anyone who isn't into modular synthesis, the old school way, I mean, you used to, in the 90s or up to even beyond, you'd walk into a studio, and if you'd already recorded, say, an EP or an album or whatever in that studio, you'd have what's called a patch book, and it is literally a paper book with a picture of the synth layout, and you will have drawn with a pencil the wires going from each patch to each section, showing what your patch was to create it. So then when you go back in the studio, you'd open up the book and go, right, this was the bass sound for such and such song, and you'd patch it up exactly as it is on the picture. So bearing that in mind, these days we've all got mobile phones with cameras and whatever else, so I would say the easiest way is, depending on the synth and the rack and the layout, but the easiest way is probably just whip out your phone, take a picture of it, tag that picture as whatever song it is, and away you go. You can recreate that if you want. Second to that, I use, let me find it, it's called Sample Robot Pro, made by some lovely guys. Sample Robot Pro is so I could, for example, hook up my Moog or a modular or whatever, and you can send MIDI out and record audio in, and it will, you can set all the parameters for it, what kind of recording you do, but you could have, for example, for it to record 5 notes of every octave, or every note of 4 different octaves, so it's a whole range, and you can set the notes to be, say, 2 seconds long, but record 3 seconds worth, so it catches any aftertouch or release times or anything like that, and it will record every note, and then you can export that as a contact library bank. There are other export features, but you basically, you end up with a contact library bank of whatever your analog synth was. So that's something that's really good, and you can do it with VSTs as well. They don't have to be analog synths, so it is a great tool to have. I know the guy, I think his name's Christian, I could be wrong, but the guy who created Sample Robot, he basically kept going from studio to studio and had a bunch of sounds that he kept wanting to use, but didn't want to lug around all his gear, so he built this tool to basically sample that synth, create a contact library or whatever it is you want, whatever format, a sampler library basically, and you can set all the loop points and exit points of the notes and things like that, and any attack times and whatever, so it's really malleable, so you can really create your own sounds with it and then store them if you need them at a later date. So that would be another tip. However, I think my favourite way of doing it is to just forget about it, because in my view, the more times you do something and the more times you adventure down that road, the more you're going to learn how things work and what mistakes you made and everything like that. So actually I think my way of looking at it, much like I've said before with my Moog Sub 37, I can save presets on that, and sometimes I do save presets, but actually for my own tracks I kind of know what sort of sound I'm going for, so I'll start with an initialized preset, I'll get the sound, dial it all in, play around and enjoy that experience of creating that sound, and then I'll record it in, make my track, everything's good, and then I'll delete that preset. I'll just wipe it clean from the Moog and I'll just leave it at that. And you'll notice that a lot of my tracks have incredibly similar sounds because they're my sounds. But each time I create a new track, I start those sounds from scratch because I want them to be ever so slightly different every time. And you'll notice that, say, you know, the leads, the paraphonic sound in, say, Running Out and Borg are almost identical, but they're not. And the reason for that is because I had to reinvent that sound every time I start a new track. And I personally enjoy that experience. It's much nicer than opening a book or a photo and going, right, this goes here, right, this goes here, and just sitting there for an hour being bored. I would much rather turn it on, hit play, and just plug away until I go, yeah, that kind of sounds like what I wanted it to. So for me, that would be the best advice. Edit. Also, I've been listening to a bit of Monster Get Down this week and was wondering if you can shed any light on how he seems to keep everything so minimalistic yet interesting. With your music, I can easily hear changes, but with his, it seems to be just a percussion hit here and there to vary it up. Is that literally all that's going on? Good question. I actually don't know the answer to that either. Yeah, I think it's fairly stripped back and minimal, and I think that's the whole idea, is that his sound is that deeper side of techno. And sometimes it is just a case of switching up a little percussion sound, or maybe automating the gain of it so it now becomes a slightly more prominent feature. And it's, for me, I really appreciate that as a production technique, because it's not necessarily about the musicality of a track. Then it becomes about the technicality of a track, and being a nerd, that's kind of what I like. So yeah, I'll maybe have a listen to more of his stuff. I've never really paid enough attention to know or to think about what he's doing. I just tend to enjoy the tracks. Yeah, or maybe I'll ask him directly and let you guys know. L7 I think was next. Yeah, L7. Hey Dom, how do you prepare to play a set? Like, how do you choose what songs you want for your mix? That's a good question. Well, generally, so I used to have promos sent to me by record labels and whatever, and I think, again, when I was your age, record labels, when they were sending out vinyl and whatever, you'd get a piece of paper with some feedback forms on, you'd fill in the paper and then you'd fax it back to the office, and then you'd play the vinyl and whatever. Then obviously everything moved to email and the whole digital explosion happened, and before I knew it, you know, when it was back in vinyl, I'd get maybe 3, 4, 5 promos a week, most of which were good because it was costing them money, so they would research what kind of music you play. So a label wasn't going to send any old random piece of vinyl. But then with the digital age, emails cost nothing, so I ended up, it got to a point maybe 10 years ago. Was it really that long? Maybe not quite 10 years ago, but whatever, it got to a point where I was getting up to and over thousands of promos a week, and if I wanted to listen to all of those tracks, it would have taken me, you know, it would have been a full-time job in itself. So I ended up switching off that promo email address and decided, and this was the big clincher of it all, was that where I was getting thousands of tracks a week, I would probably keep one, you know, and so that as a percentage is just dismal. So I was listening to 99.99% rubbish just to find that one cool track, whereas now I jump on Beatport, to be honest, and I like to go shopping. I sort by new or latest releases or whatever. I tend to avoid the charts because I figured, well, if it's in top 10 then everyone else is playing it, so it's probably not, I've probably missed the boat on that, I suppose. You know, sometimes I might have a listen to it just in case, but yeah, I sort of struggle with genres, to be honest, because my sort of style of music is somewhere in between techno and house and tech house and electro, and it's sort of it's somewhere in amongst them all, so I'll listen to all of those and try and find some tracks. But it's literally just a case of sitting down for a few hours, listening to hundreds of tracks and just buying the ones I want or the ones I like. After I do that, I then tend to try and sort of sort them into not playlists but folders of maybe some of the tracks I'll call early set, so they're the deeper, more ploddier stuff, the warm-up stuff. Then I'll have a folder called mid set, which is, you know, slightly more hard going, and then I have a folder called peak set, and that's the full-on stuff that's verging on techno. So yeah, so those are my three sort of folders. So I'll then copy those to USB stick, assuming I'm using CDJs or whatever. I'll copy those onto USB stick, and then I'll kind of put them together in a playlist order. So usually I'll try and find the key of the track and make sure that it kind of sits comfortably. And also what I do is I hit play in the middle of the track and then jump to hit play in the middle of the next track and make sure that it's not gonna just go, oh Jesus, what's this, you know. And yeah, so it's kind of, you're roughly sketching out a set, I suppose, but the actual, when it comes to performing, then you know, I've got three folders to choose from, so it depends on what time I'm playing, what the guy before me is playing. You know, if he's playing what I would call my mid-set stuff, then I'm not going to start with early set stuff because that's just going backwards. So yeah, I think that's pretty much all I do, and I try not to keep it too structured. I want to be able to throw in something a bit different, so I don't tend to you know, if I'm playing for 2 hours, I don't just have 20 tracks. I'll probably have 100 available, and then I'll pick the 20 on the night. So yeah, that's basically all I do. As for choosing what songs I want for my mix, I don't know. I just kind of I need it to be well mixed. I need there to be certain elements in there of I'm not sure what it is I look for. I don't know. I've never had to put it into words. I need there to be an interesting melody. I need there to be a good breakdown. I'm not talking epic drops. I just need there to be a good breakdown, and when it does come back in, I need it to feel good, I suppose. And yeah, it kind of needs to have some decent sound design. I don't, you know, if it sounds a bit too cheap or plasticky, then I just won't bother. And I hate to say this, but the track could be the best track on earth, but if it hasn't got a decent range of frequency, then I won't even buy it. So yeah, I can be very, very fussy when it comes to my DJ sets. Rod Marconi, thanks for answering my question. Dom Sub37, high five. St. Nicholas, Joel goes into a kick drum folder and basically rapidly fires down the list, holding arrow down until he hears what he's looking for. See Steve Duda interview. You may as well just use a sample because most beginners won't have outboard gear to run audio samples through. Sub37, high five. Yeah, so yeah, okay, I didn't know Joel just did that, but makes perfect sense. That's pretty much what I do. I mean, I tend to use Sonic Academy's Kick 2 these days just because I love it so much, and I think I can make quite unique kicks on that. But certainly before I was using Kick 2, I'd literally just have a folder of kicks go down, 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 and I'm just listening because I know the track I'm working on at the moment needs maybe a full-bodied kick, or it needs that little sharp transient that almost kind of hurts the ears, and I'm just flicking through, I'm listening for that transient, and I'm listening for a full-bodied kick, and just tap, 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 and then I get the right one, and I'm like, right, this is the one I want. So yeah. Kavakay, Cheers Don, really interesting insights into how the takedown system works. From a takedown service provider's perspective, what's the point of discerning between pirated versions and unofficial remixes if their customers, i.e. record labels, don't care? Why would they go to the expense of building that ability into their algorithm? Yeah, exactly, they wouldn't, because a record label having somebody do a bootleg of their track doesn't make that record label any money. Okay, you could argue that it gives them some exposure, but does it really? You know, I've talked about this before with giving you music out for free or giving free downloads and all of this. Does it really get you that much exposure? Have you seen many artists suddenly shoot to fame because they gave a bunch of tracks out for free? I don't think I have. I mean, there are probably some who give that impression, but I can assure you there was money somewhere behind it. So yeah, so as far as the takedown services go, it's all automated. It's just listening for a chord progression, or I don't know what their algorithms do, but I'm assuming it's something along those lines. It's looking for some sort of frequency division to become a chord phrase or a melody or something along those lines. So you know, that's all it's looking for, that's all it's going to do. So yeah, so why would they bother separating it? If the record label doesn't make a profit from bootlegs, then they don't care if bootlegs get taken down, and if they don't make a profit from people pirating originals, then clearly they're not going to care about those getting taken down. So as far as labels are concerned, just take it all down. It makes no difference to them. 1. I'm up for the sample pack competition, just for a bit of fun really, not bothered about prizes or release contract. Would you be up for doing that comp on that basis? So yeah, I kind of said that in one of the other questions. 2. Also up for the mixdown swap idea. I'd probably need to watch your earlier mixdown videos properly before attempting that. So I did notice a few guys on the Facebook group, which I'll link below here, a few guys have already started setting that up. I did put in a comment at one point because people were asking what kind of file formats and whatever, and someone suggested, well, why don't we go with whatever a mix engineer wants? So I commented in that saying, well, this is what I ask for. So 24-bit 48k, max minus 6 dB if you can on each stem, but it's digital, so if it hits 0, it's not, as long as it's below 0, then it's not a big deal. And yeah, .wav, just because I prefer it, and bouncing individual stems with all the effects and anything on, but no compressors unless it's a subjective choice. And yeah, I think that was basically it. So anyone who does want to do a mixdown swap, then head to the link below for the Facebook group and you'll see it there. Please stop giving away yours and my LFO modulation secrets. Just read out the following. Bitwig is rubbish, the modulators are a lie and completely unusable. Yeah. 4. Deadmau5 kicks and general sound design are covered fairly comprehensively in his masterclass, for what it's worth. There we go. Yeah, I forgot he did that masterclass as well, so anyone wanting to know, check that out. 5. Pie tattoo? That's so magnificently nerdy, I salute you. Cheers. Sub 37, high five. And I can see my camera is, well, 23 minutes. Yeah, let's give it a change now. I'll be back in a second. And I'm back. Right, okay, so Deadmau5 Ingo, Mexican Deadmau5. Hey Dom, thanks for reading and replying to my comment on your latest AMA. I guess I was wrong about the artist's copyright, but thanks for providing me useful information about companies that scan the internet for copyrighted material. I see now where I've been mistaken. I got no questions for this week's AMA, maybe another week, who knows. Anyways, have a nice weekend, sub 37, high five. Sereno Black. Thanks for the response. In relation to the tattoo question, check your IGDM, but on a side note, in regards to the sample comp question, made me think, if someone bought the pack, used a riff bassline line from the pack, and if it hit certain charts to whatever degree, where would you stand being royalty free, still if the reason for the track's success was initially a royalty free sample, keeping in mind the sample loop still sounded fairly similar? Sub 37, high five. Oh yeah, no, I did check out your DM actually, and I checked out your profile. I like your work, I really do. I didn't get time to respond because I was on my way out somewhere at the time, and I forgot about it afterwards, so sorry about that. But yes, I did see it, and I will hopefully respond when I get a chance. As for royalty free, well, if it's royalty free, it's royalty free no matter what. You can't change your mind on that. So I have done a lot of loops packs in my time, some of which, in fact one in particular, I did with a friend of mine, a percussionist, well, multi-instrumentalist I suppose, and he wrote some kick-ass chord progressions, and we put this pack together, sounded great, released it, fine, not a problem. You know, we made an okay amount of money from it, I suppose. It was worth doing, spending the time and money and whatever, recording everything and getting it done, so we covered costs, it was fine. Then, it must have been about 2 months later, he came bursting into my studio going, "Dude, listen to this." And he played me a track, I won't say who the artist was, but it was UK top 10 I think, but definitely top 40. And I listened to it and I went, "That isn't," and he goes, "Yeah, it is." There was one chord phrase that we'd done, I want to say a xylophone, but it was something along those sorts of sounds, and they had used that loop as it is, no effects, nothing, from start to finish. The whole track was based around this one chord progression loop, and it was a good track. And he was then going, "Well, what can we do? Can we make money off this or whatever?" And I was like, "Well, no, because we sold it as royalty free. They're welcome to use it." So in the EULAs of loops packs, I think there are rules on, you can't essentially resell it. So if, for example, somebody used that loop and only that loop, and that was their track, then they can't sell that because you're basically just selling the loop. But so long as the track has, I think legally speaking, it's something like 3 or more sounds on top of it, at any given point in the track, which every track does, then it's royalty free and you're welcome to do with it what you want. I've also seen that happen quite a lot, with tracks getting into the charts. You know, quite often when I'm scrolling through Beatport or whatever, I'll hear a track and go, "I know those hi-hats," or "I recognise that kick," or whatever. But I like it, I love that. I'm not, you know, why should I get a cut of their success? If they manage to make a track UK top 40, well, I couldn't have made that loop into a top 40 selling track, because I'm not that capable or skilled or whatever it is that's required to get to the UK top 40. I've never been in the UK top 40 as an artist. You know, I've been there as an engineer. I've engineered for top 40s, but you know, I'm not that skilled a musician, and certainly not vocalist or whatever it is that you need to be. So yeah, so that's where you stand, is you're free to do whatever you want with it, pretty much. So if you write a track and it is entirely made of 10 different loops from a loops pack and it goes #1, good for you. I couldn't do that, so yeah, that's where you stand legally. You're welcome to do it, and good luck to you if you do, and congratulations if you do. So yeah, so as far as I'm concerned, as a sound designer, the only feeling I get is pride, really, that somebody enjoyed a loop of mine enough to make that happen. So yeah. Zombo, I see that you use a trackpad rather than a mouse. Why? this goes back to, it's a good question, a weird one, but it's because when I used to do a lot of touring, I would take a laptop with me and I would be using Ableton in the hotel room or whatever, on a bus or on a plane or wherever I was. And obviously a laptop has a trackpad, so I was just used to that movement, and then I would get to the studio and I would be a bit weirded out using a mouse. So I kind of figured I'll get myself a trackpad because it's just like using a laptop, and then when I go between laptop and studio, it was never going to be a weird feeling. So as simple as that. And now I don't really use a laptop, but I do like the trackpad. Yeah, so I can't think of any other reason. I'm just not bothered looking at a mouse. However, now I'm getting to an age where my wrist starts hurting from RSI if I spend a lot of time in the studio scrolling and flicking through things. So I am gonna maybe look at, someone mentioned to me the other day that apparently you can get what's called a vertical mouse, where you hold it basically like a joystick, so it keeps your wrist upright rather than in that flat position of because it's to do with the bones twisting or touching, because your bones twist when you do that, and in that position is unnatural, that position is natural, I think. Something like that, I don't know, but I'll probably look into that at some point, so you may well see it change to a vertical mouse at some point. Yeah, Nightquaker. Hey Don, I'm really curious about something. Since you're familiar with Reactor, have you also heard of or used Pure Data or Max MSP? Yes and yes. I did PD stuff years ago, loved it, and Max MSP as well, back when it was free, and then when Ableton launched Max for Live, I went straight out and got that, and built some bits in there. Yeah, big fan of the object orientated stuff. It's a brilliant way for anyone who wants to learn the really geeky side of sound design or synthesis or anything along those lines. Then I highly recommend either Pure Data or Max MSP. Pure Data I think used to be free, and it still was when Max MSP became a commercial product, so I don't know if that's still the case, but it might still be free. Particularly entire VSTs are initially created with Pure Data and then compiled into VST format, like FXpansion Strobe. Didn't know that, and interestingly I worked on the beta version of Strobe, but didn't know it was compiled from Pure Data. So I'm curious if you ever worked with these two visual programming languages. Yes, so like I just said, yeah, I used to use both of them. I think I preferred Max MSP just because the layout really, and it kind of made a bit more sense. I think PD was a bit too cumbersome at the time. I mean, but we're going back years ago now. So yes, I'm very well aware of them. I don't know how easy it is to compile straight to VST from those formats. I would imagine these days things have changed, so it's probably quite easy, but I don't know. In fact, let me know if you know, because with this synth that I was doing in Reactor, if it's just a case of, you know, file export as VST in one of those, then I might well look at those a bit more seriously. But from what I remember, you had to export the metadata and then import that to a C compiler or something, and then export that and compile it as a VST. I don't know if that's still the case, and actually maybe I know more now than I did back then, so maybe it's easier, I don't know. But I seem to remember thinking at the time when I was playing with Max MSP that I wanted to compile it into a VST, and there was something that stopped me. It was either I didn't know enough about how to do it, or there was something that made the VST just a bit shit. I can't remember. And then on to Zombo. What is an analog mixer? How do they work and what are they for? So I'm going to hazard a guess that you're talking about an analog summing mixer. It's hard to explain. a lot of people talk about analog summing, and it's really not much different to a digital mixer. Certainly you can create a digital summing mixer that acts in the same way as an analog summing mixer, but I'm not sure I know the insides well enough to explain, so I could be horribly wrong here. But the general difference is, with a digital wave you have a sample rate like 44.1 kilohertz or 48 kilohertz, and that's your sample rate. So if a waveform is rising sharply and you take a sample of it there, and then 48 thousandth of a second later you take another sample and it's shot up, that huge jump can act as almost a square wave, so you get what's called aliasing or anti-aliasing clipping basically. So when you're then stacking up multiple waveforms in a digital mixer, because there is a finite sample rate, you can only take a sample at any given frequency. When you're adding those multiple waves together, it can give you those sharp spikes, and you can get clipping or aliasing or whatever it is, inter-sample clicking, that's what it is, I think. God, I'm having to search deep in the back of my head for this stuff. So you get inter-sample clipping. An example of that is when you have a 24-bit WAV and you export as a 16-bit WAV, so it's to do with the bit depth as well. It interferes with Nyquist theorem, and you end up with basically those sort of short spikes. It's to do with signal processing. Whereas with an analog summing mixer, analog hardware, an analog sine wave, for example, is infinite in sample rate. It's, if you imagine loading up your workstation and changing your sample rate to infinity, that's essentially, because it's electrical components, they're essentially, the sample rate is essentially the speed of light, or the speed of an electron, I suppose. So it means that you're less likely to get inter-sample clicking. There are other aspects to it as well, but the end result means that you can push things a little bit harder, a little bit further, and with less detrimental and less destructive results. However, the last thing I am going to say about analog summing on this video at least is that it's also, I hate to say, but almost a novelty feature. There are very, very few recordings in the world where somebody is going to go, you know what would make this album better is an analog summing mixer. There are very few engineers in the world who think that the difference of having an analog summing mixer compared to a digital summing mixer is going to somehow drastically change the outcome of an album. At the end of the day, if it's recorded well and it's mixed well and there's a good dynamic range and then it's mastered well, then you're really not going to notice a difference. So hopefully that's kind of explained what an analog mixer is, but essentially it's like 4 or 8 buses that you send your, say, 16 or 32 channels into. So it's much like Harrison Mix Bus or something like that. And in fact, Harrison Mix Bus, I would say, is probably far more superior than your average analog summing mixer, because it has so much more on offer and there are more features, which is where digital will always beat analog, is the amount of features and the durability and the malleability of these things are far greater. So yeah, hopefully that's answered your question. And then last but not least is Stanislav Melis, sub 37, high five. That is all the questions done for this week. I don't know how long it's been, but doesn't really matter, does it? So I hope you've enjoyed this episode. As usual, please do subscribe, comment, also share this video out if you can, because that helps me, which helps you. And if you have made it this far into the video, then once again you deserve a medal, and to prove you've made it this far into the video, I would suggest you put the keyword comment down as road, R-O-D-E, road. I'll see you next week. Cheers.